Hi, Professor Cohen. Welcome to California Government Politics. This is the Chapter 10, the California Budget Process. The state budget is probably the most critical piece of the legislation that California can enact. By passing the budget is essential to run the projects that keep things moving in California. The budget is usually drafted. The California budget in California is formed in four fundamental steps. The governor formulates his budget with the support of the Department of Finance. He then sends the budget to the legislature each January. Each May, he publishes the May revision and contains any changes to the original version. The governor signs or vetoes any budget passed by the legislator. If he signs the budget, he can still use his line item veto to lower any line item, and the agencies implement the budget as passed. If they don't pass a budget by the mid part of the year, the California law prohibits the legislators from being given paychecks. If the balance goes negative in the general fund, the state must obtain added funds by borrowing money to cover its ongoing and future projects. Through external borrowing, it can do so by obtaining the funds from Wall Street or through internal borrowing from other funds that California operates outside the general fund. California already has many earmarked funds set by the legislator for particular purposes. In case of a cash deficiency in the general fund, the state controller can temporarily borrow from these funds to cover the inadequacies or deficiencies ever provided. The California state legislature is also different from, of course, the United States Congress. It is term limited, and the governor has a line item veto, which allows him to cut or eliminate any item in a budget bill without rejecting the whole bill. And it's worth considering that both houses are based on population, and California has an initiative process, and this initiative process to bypass the legislature if needed. The legislative process by which bills become law is through the bill of bills that are drafted and sent through a bill process course of legislative assembly and passed by the governor. Today, the revenue of the state of California and the general fund has more or less comes primarily from three taxes: personal income tax, sales tax, and the bank and corporation tax. These percentages may slightly differ over the years, but proportions may mostly the same. Through a careful combination of discretionary allocation and formula, some general fund revenue is taken off the top and diverted to another fund known as the budget stabilization account. The largest single source of revenue is the personal income tax, which provides almost half the general fund, which can be thought of as a checking account used for ongoing services, and California education is the most prominent component of that. The personal income tax is highly progressive in California. In the budget, there are expenditures, deficits, and debt. Within the first 10 days of the calendar year, the governor must submit to the legislature a unified budget that is carefully balanced, contains a reasonable explanation for expenditure, and is accomplished by a budget bill itemizing each recommended expenditure. Politically speaking, when considered the budget a statement of priorities, state budgets tend to express the fiscal priorities of some of the groups over others. Education is the most significant single expenditure in California, with K through 14 being part of your community college, required under Proposition 98 to be 40% or more of the general fund. If one includes higher education, constitutes approximately half the state budget. Health and human services is the next largest category, followed by the courts and corrections. Over time, California has experienced several budget crises. By February 2004, for example, the state's budget deficit had grown massive and out of control. California state carries the largest state burden in the country and is also among the few states that has borrowed close to the budget gap. It is worth considering that California state has long featured sloppy budgetary language when it comes to deficits and surpluses. Problems with budgeting in the political world of California. First, extreme polarization of regional political cultures across the state make legislative compromise and consensus building difficult. There are differences between voting tendencies in San Francisco, Los Angeles County, and San Diego County. The second is the challenge posed by internal conflicts and secessionist movements in some local jurisdictions, as San Fernando Valley sometimes wants to secede from Los Angeles. And the third is the crisis in local government finance and threat to effective home rule caused by a worsening state budget deficit and the state government's efforts to solve it by seizing property tax revenues from county and state governments. Given the current blue state politics in California, the Democrats greatly influence the state policymaking process. In its present-day political configuration, the California legislature is mostly dominated by Democrats, and the Democratic leadership and the California government will confer on what is acceptable. There are 5 relevant players in the budget game in California: the governor, the 4 leaders of both parties, and the House and the legislature. They need 2 or more One or two marginal votes may create an even more cast for fundamental players, but right now it's still Democratic. The governor's role on both ends of the budgetary process, and considering that one person is required to broker the deal, the governor is usually the key player, but he is sometimes held hostage by reluctant legislators. Taxation in California. Most people will argue that Californians pay high taxes. Some say they're overtaxed. The state has cut taxes several times in the last decades, and not raised them, as the state received more revenues than expected. The tax is low for the middle-class families that have little or no tax until they earn more than $45,000. The tax load from the state and local governments in California is about average among 50 states, sometimes even below average. The highest income Californians continue to pay a considerable share of California's personal income tax. For 2018 California tax year, the top 1% of income earners paid around 46% of all personal income taxes. It is essential to consider that California's top earners tended to derive significant incomes from financial markets. Consequently, the ups and downs of the stock market can strongly reflect personal income taxes. As a result, the budget forecasting ultimately involves projecting trends in the real economy and financial booms, cycles, and busts. The overall California tax structure, compared with other states, is more dependent on volatile taxes. They go up and down with the economy, income tax, and sales, and less dependent on taxes that do not vary with the economy. Proposition 13, limited property taxes. While most states that rank high on the scale of taxes per 1,000 of personal income are low income states like South Carolina, California is considered a rich one. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I appreciate your attention.